All right, guys, welcome back. Quick update on the tidal Potomac River. We are about ready to get pounded here in Maryland on the tidal Potomac River. And I don't mean Hurricane Aaron. Hurricane Aaron has moved on. It's definitely impacted a lot of the areas that a lot of guys probably were banking on, no pun, but banking on fishing coming up here. And what I mean by getting pounded, in the next few weeks, really the next 2 weeks, the tidal Potomac is absolutely just going to get overfished by every estimation. Here's why. This Saturday, coming up on the 6th, we've got a Shenandoah BFL Phoenix Bass Fishing League event for the Shenandoah. Immediately after that event, there are people already here now fishing for the next 2 weeks, okay? And this is what we got coming up. We got that BFL event on Saturday, okay, September 6th. We've got a Toyota Series event beginning on the 11th. Those guys are already here, okay? So we got those guys pre-fishing and going to be fishing for the Toyota Series. I believe it's the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. And then on the 14th, which is a Sunday, we have the Abu Garcia College Fishing event. So we've got 3 events bringing hundreds of anglers and boats to the Potomac River over the next 10 days. Going to be crazy. So if you're local like me, probably not a great week to be out on the tidal Potomac River. But with Hurricane Aaron and everything that's happened, it's going to actually make for some pretty neat events. This is going to be something. Normally, you kind of know what happens. September is not June, guys. Okay, in September, the grass is all in. Like, it's fully in. Even to the hilt in some areas where it actually becomes cumbersome. Okay, but when you've got a hurricane like Aaron rolling in, like he did at the end of August, anything that's loose grass is going to get carried. Okay, it's going to get pushed. All right, and that creates a lot of issues for grass anglers. Still a lot of grass. We had storm surge for sure. I think that the areas that are the areas that will be impacted even into this weekend that are remnants from Hurricane Aaron are going to be the southern part of the Potomac, not so much Middle River and then up towards DC. Those areas, unless it's a severe where the actual storm crossed Maryland in a hurricane and came into Maryland and PA and all that, when those storms are kind of stay out over the Atlantic, you basically get storm surge from the convergence of the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay. Okay, that's kind of like what happens. So the lower ends of Virginia and Maryland, there's going to be a lot more tidal surge into those creeks. Now, some of those creeks that are down lower, whether it's Port Tobacco, whether it's Nanjamoy, creeks like that are on the lower end, they haven't had as much grass as some of the Middle River creeks have. So they may not be as negatively impacted in terms of the grass removal or erosion than you would think. There is a lot more grass in some areas this year in September that people are not talking about. There's areas in the river system that have been a little bit more productive this year than they have been in years past. You guys might be familiar with what we saw during the summertime events when Major League Fishing was here. Some areas that people weren't really accustomed to with like Ott Defoe's win and things like that, right? That set up because it was June. Those areas aren't really going to be in play as much in September. There's going to be other areas in September where there is matted grass, there is vegetation. There's a lot more opportunities probably for anglers than going all the way back in to shallow water in June when it's 95 to 100 degrees, right? So the river automatically is different in September, and you can see that a lot of times by weights, and you can see that a lot of times by the baits historically that are actually catching fish as compared to April, May, June, and then it's these September events. The weather has completely dropped way off in the last few weeks. Okay, so the temperatures going into this weekend are highs of about the low 80s is going to be the high. Low 60s as the low to start this BFL event off on Saturday, okay? And then into next week, we fall to the low 80s to the low to mid 50s, okay? That's going to change again. This river is going to change again between today and the Toyota Series next week, okay? The water was cold because of the storm surge brought in from the Atlantic Ocean because of Hurricane Aaron. That's still a factor today, where we saw the water temperatures drop. The bass were completely dislocated, okay, for about 3 days. You kind of check out some guide reports. They probably got a little bit of that information if you're interested in that kind of stuff. But they went from being more shallow and structure-oriented to more suspended, meaning they moved back out suspended. So where are these areas now that when you look at this weekend and you look at next week, some target area of opportunities for September that may not have existed when these guys were back here maybe in June or places like that. And you're probably going to find guys in the same usual spots, especially guys coming from, further afar that just know the reputation of certain areas. But again, areas like Potomac that people have been down on have actually been producing quality fish. Chickamuxon has actually been producing quality fish, but they're not areas where a lot of people talk about them because most of the tournament news that comes out of the Tidal Potomac at the professional level is always in that early June type of season, right? Well, as these waters cool off, there's also fish moving out. I know this is going to sound crazy, but don't be surprised if some forward-facing sonar comes into play. Every bit as much as someone who has plans of throwing a frog. Okay, there's going to be a lot of vegetation, but there's also going to be a lot of vegetation that's out of the water because of that storm surge in different areas. Okay, not in every area. Some of the creeks are more protected than others. Okay, some of that matted grass is a little bit different than in others. But in terms of the channel, in terms of the lower section of the Tidal Potomac, you're probably going to run into a little bit more problem with grass that's been moved or dislocated because of that storm surge. Okay, I do still believe that the Greenway Flats is always going to be a dominant player in September. Probably more so in September than in June. Unless you're an absolute grass guy and you're in the summertime, and that's your strength and that's your going. But in September, that vegetation is fully in. A lot of it's going to be predicated on the water temps and obviously the clarity of the water in terms of what baits are going to stand out. Is the vibrating jig going to be the player that it's always been there or not, depending on clarity, depending on water temperature? The grass is certainly there. Better than probably the last 2 years. But there are other areas up towards Mount Vernon. There are other areas that there are. Belmont Bay is still one of the most underrated areas in the entire fishery for guys that have a multitude of skill sets, okay, that they can pick apart. Guys that can pick up depressions and trenches on their grabs and target the transitioning bass from going into the bay and then going out to deeper water in the Potomac, right? You've also got Canes Creek. You've got the creek that's up there where Mason Neck is that the bass will move into and move out of. And so that mouth area is always a major player when we get changes in the weather patterns because it becomes a thoroughfare. Leads them out to those ditches and depressions. There's areas that you're going to see on your grabs in Belmont Bay area that you may not be familiar with. But you'll see a lot of guys, and there are a lot of guys already starting to pick that area apart because it's been a really good, productive area this year. And then you can have guys that are going to go up the river, okay, right in through Belmont up to the Quan and fish the docks, okay? And I've seen people, I've heard people, not from here, talk about how they don't go past the bridge. That's a mistake, because there's a lot more docks beyond the first bridge on the Occoquan as you go in from the Potomac River in Belmont Bay. It's a lot of docks, and that's a lot of deep water docks. A lot of freaking deep hull boats are in there, and marinas and stuff. And there is a lot of opportunities for guys that want to pitch and flip docks, even in September. And so that is a highly underrated area, just like the docks that you're going to see that litter all along the northern end of Middle River all the way up to Fort Washington that are kind of stick out. Those isolated docks, in a lot of these, the Bay, Pohick, Fort Washington areas where there's one or two docks that are kind of isolated, they always hold quality bass. Like, it is amazing to me how many people immediately just go to grass, or they immediately go to shallow all the time on the Tidal Potomac. Powell's Creek has been an underperformer this year as opposed to years past. Years past, events have been won in Powell's Creek. Okay? Powell's Creek, for whatever reason, these creeks go through this. The Mattawoman, obviously one of probably the most fished, probably the most overfished in terms of pressure of any creek on the Maryland side of the river, has probably had an average year this year in terms of production. There's always going to be fish in there. There's always fish released from Smallwood in there, from local trails, national trails, professional trails. So there's always going to be local community fish, in Mattawoman. There's no argument there. But it's certainly not the levels that it used to be. We have seen a transitional movement in the Tidal Potomac to a lot of creeks that were often underperformers. Creeks like Aquia, creeks like Potomac now are back. They're middle to lower end on the river. If you look at the estuary, okay, on the Virginia side. All along that Virginia side, really this year, well, probably for the last 2 summers, there have been a lot more bags caught along the walls and along the areas outside the mouths of the creeks holding the marinas and the docks, and the crossings and the pilings and all that, as opposed to in the creeks. If you talk to a lot of locals of where they're catching their fish, I don't know if that's just they're catching them in a transitional phase, or maybe the bass now are setting up during the tide on those walls, okay, that you're going to find because you've got power plants, right? You've got the Quantico military base. You've got the air base. You've got all these things that work your way down the river, okay, on the Virginia side that provide opportunities. And it's just a matter of that timing of when the bass move up to them and when they move away from them. I still think a wild card in these events this week isn't going to be the grass. The event is probably going to be dominated by the grass, but it's going to be the select anglers that actually get some suspended fish, that get on a bite that's a channel bite or a mouth bite or something that's a little deeper water where the bass are suspended, and they get on a bunch of bass in that scenario and catch a bunch, right? And catch a limit quick, okay? And then go. I really believe that is because of what has happened since post-Hurricane Aaron, okay? And the change in the estuary of what's happened. Not only because of the water changes, there were not very many fish this weekend over the holiday caught shallow, okay? Most of the reports were fish were being caught out, okay, a little bit. And I think that's part of a result of Hurricane Aaron, okay? Now, we're a week away. I mean, we've got a BFL event on Saturday, but we're a week away from Toyota Series. So things can reset, right? But I still think these fish are going to be transitioning. I don't know if it's their full transition to fall, right? And that kind of transition frenzy. I wouldn't just go far as to say that, but I think they're moving. They're dislocating themselves from they did during the storm and that, the remnants of that storm. So they very well could next week be back up closer to, the 2, 3, 4 feet as opposed to being in 8, 9, or 10 feet like they are today. So it's going to be very interesting. Obviously, if you know anything about the Potomac, obviously the dominating baits on the Potomac River are going to be your normal, usual suspects, even in September, because everybody brings it. Everybody brings the frog. Everybody brings the the vibrating jig or the chatterbait. Everybody brings the wacky rig, okay? The Senko, okay? Everybody brings those things. But I would not be surprised if we see something a little bit different this September. And I honestly believe we're going to have to see something different on September 14th when the Abu Garcia College teams show up, because the river will have been pounded for a week. And so it's going to be that team in the Abu Garcia event that adapts, that does something a little bit different, okay? Because those fish in the areas that are usual suspects, like Greenway Flats, okay, will have been pounded for 7 to 10 days before that event, okay? So those guys have got to come with the mindset that we may have to have a plan B and C, okay? Because you know what these guys are going to be throwing throughout the entire Toyota series, okay? Because it is September, it is the tidal Potomac, and the Potomac doesn't really change that much. The fish relocate, but that's about it. The baits are pretty much the baits. But there have been some wild card baits this year. The swim jig has been an absolute dominant player on the tidal Potomac this year, okay? And I can honestly say it's pretty darn close to the bleeding jig, okay, this year. Now, it hasn't been in years past. And so that's a testament to maybe the fish overcompensating or over-adapting to the chatterbait, maybe. And that swim jig, a little bit more silent, a little bit more deadly, a little bit more, not seeing that as much as being conditioned to the chatterbait, maybe. Kind of interesting. I've talked to anglers that actually have utilized, crazy it sounds, have really been able to utilize the Jika rig, the Neko rigs, and the freaking drop shots. You don't really hear that really at the higher end levels as much as you do with local guys. But it has been highly effective this year. And so anglers are going to be playing those inside and outside grass lines. They're going to be pounding those things. And they've shifted a little bit post Hurricane Aaron, from what I understand, in quite a few areas. And it's just really going to be interesting to see how many people stick with the shallow, how long they're going to give the shallow, okay, during their day, this Saturday. It's gotten cold, guys. I mean, it's gotten in low 50s in the morning. Like, you're taking the kids to school or you're heading to the boat ramp, it's 50 degrees. Like, it's not June or July, August anymore. And that's got to be reflective, definitely, in how people are going to fish the tidal Potomac over the next 10 days. Because those fish are reacting to it. Colder water, wind. We've been hit with a lot of wind. It has been extremely windy out on the water. So how's that going to set up the shoreline? How's that going to set up the shallow water bite, right? What's it going to play? Is the frog really going to be a top 3 or 4 player this time around? There's a chance it might not be. How long are guys going to stick with that frog, right? Like, it's going to be, mornings are colder and staying colder longer, okay, than years past. Okay, part of that is the weather we've had, like the hurricane, that brought a lot of cold weather, a lot of coldness into the area. And we're still, we're playing around with that. I don't think we're going to see any temperatures over the next 7 to 10 days higher than about 86 or 87 degrees, depending on where you are. And that's probably going to be, midday and late afternoon. And when you look at the tides, man, I mean, the tide this Saturday is at 6 a.m. So high tide is at 6 a.m. for the BFL event. That's right at launch. You're right on the high tide. So you're starting the tournament right on. And then you guys know how the tides work, right? Like every single day, it's an hour, right, as we go through the cycle. So when the Toyota Series arrives, their high tide is at 9:48 on day 1, 10:49 on day 2, 11:37 on day 3. And then when the college anglers arrive on Sunday to launch for their event, high tide is at 12:42. So depending on whether you're a high tide or a low tide guy, okay, and I've learned now that the myths of what we really believe about that, because I never realized there were so many guys on in both camps. Guys that really, really were excelled at the low tide, and then guys that really, really excelled at the high tide, and then there's guys that actually can fish both. But it's hard to find those guys who can fish both equally as effective. And so when you set up, it's a tale of two rivers, right? Like a river that sets up at high tide at 6 a.m. is completely different than a river a week later that's at 12:42 high tide, right? You got a lot of stuff in the morning you can do moving into that tide. And then in the afternoon, you're coming up as that high tide hits, you can play down towards that lower tide before it lines out, right? It's just an interesting strategy how you would set up those days differently. When Toyota Series, they're coming midweek, 9:48, 10:49, 11:37 by day 3. If there's, guys still around day 3, they're right in the middle of the day. It's right in the middle of that, So they got that low tide into the high tide, and then the high tide swinging back down. It's a lot of running. There's going to be a lot of opportunity on the second and third day for probably some running and gunning, running the tides, as opposed to maybe, are you really going to be running the tide on an event where high tide is at 12:42? Not really sure that's as much of a factor. I think you got a lot more windows on that particular day for those guys in the college series, and they're going to need it because the estuary is going to be absolutely pounded for a week before they even get to their event, and so they're going to need that time. The part about it is they're not really have the ability to really pre-fish for the college event because the Toyota Series is out there on the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. The days going into their event. So they're kind of all going to be kind of at a disadvantage, in terms of actually being out on the water, really breaking down a lot of these areas for their event. Like I said, Toyota Series guys are already here. You're already seeing them. And the smart guys, in my opinion, are those guys that are launching they're launching at the Quan. They're launching at Marshall Hall. They're not launching at Smallwood at the bottom area. They're launching at some of these other ramps. You launch at Marshall Hall, you're on the Greenway Flats, lickety split, and you got all day to break that place down. But if you launch from Smallwood, you got to run to the Greenway Flats. That burns a lot of gas and a lot of time where you could be fishing. So the guys that are really dialed into the estuary understand this and know where they can launch from. Now, they can't launch from those places on event day, but they can launch in those places during pre-fishing, right? And a lot of the guys I've seen, it's amazing how many more and more guys the last 2 years I've seen at the places that I prefer to launch from. Because I don't prefer to run all the way down to Smallwood from where I live. I'm up west of DC. So I would have to go 495 all the way around Maryland, all the way down to Smallwood. That is a long drive in gas and everything, okay? Then if I just go down 95 south, and I launch into the Quan, and I take 12 miles out into frickin' Belmont Bay, okay? Or I decide, hey, I'm going to go launch at Leesylvania, and I'm going to hit the creek. Or I'm going to launch, at Marshall Hall, cut the distance in half, launch at Marshall Hall, and hit the Greenway Flats right away, okay? That's the game plan that people need to, be utilizing as opposed to spending all your time going back and forth driving, burning gas in your truck, burning gas in your boat because you're running from Maryland all the way across the river to Virginia to fish the creeks when you could have just launched at Leesylvania during pre-fishing. Or you could have just launched into the Quan and dumped right into Belmont Bay and gone up around Mason Neck and gone up to Pohick. I mean, there are just different things that you can do that you want to utilize to maximize your time. You don't see that in a lot of the videos. A lot of the guys, the professionals, when they do a lot of their videos from the Bass Pro Tour or from the Elite Series, when they come to, they don't really show you that. They don't really show you where they're launching from when they're pre-fishing, okay? It begins right on the water. Most of those guys aren't launching from Smallwood. Some of them are, because they're staying down there in that part of Maryland for the tournament. So it just makes it a little, makes it easier for them. But, when you're doing these things at a BFL level or Toyota Series level, college guys, you want to maximize gas. You want to maximize time on the water, right? So that's where we're at, man, for this weekend. Starting Saturday. It's already starting now, guys. Their freaking places it's already loaded up. But PFL Saturday, Toyota Series next week for 3 days, then ending on Saturday, and then on Sunday, we've got the Abu Garcia College Fishing. So hopefully we're going to be there. We're going to get a lot of coverage, be able to cover it for everybody, Maybe get some interviews in. Maybe get some photos in. We'll see what happens. We're definitely going to get some fish in. We're definitely going to get some big fish in, hopefully. Get some guys who get on some big fish, get big bags. I get this question all the time. September, what's the bag going to be? What's it going to take? The safe guess is going to be if you can get 15 pounds a day, you're going to be okay. Okay? That's always the safe bet. But with what we're seeing, and obviously this could change, but what we're seeing, and we'll know a little bit more on Saturday when we see how the BFL Shenandoah does. But don't be surprised if you don't see a lot more anglers in the 10 to 12 pound. Still think you're going to need 15 to 16. I would be surprised if on Saturday it gets to 18, but someone can always get on a great bite. That's the river. It's always there. There's guys, I know it sounds crazy. There's always a 20-pound bag on the Tidal Potomac out there. There is. It's there every day. You just got to go get it. There's 3-pounders. There's 4-pounders. 4-pounders are probably going to be a little bit harder to come by now in September, and because of the weather that we've had and the cooling off. But 3.5-pounders, they're there, man. And that's a dominant. The 3-pound, the 3 to 3.25 pound is a dominant class right now in the Tidal Potomac in terms of weight. That is a dominant, significant population density of that particular size fish. So you get on 5 of those, okay? Locals are pulling 20, 21, 19. Team events have pulled 18, 15 to 18. Again, that's from the summer, not last week or right now after Hurricane Aaron. So that's the wild card. All right. So it's going to be a Runts in the Sea. So this is just the first one. We're ready to get going. I'm really great to see. I'm really happy for the guys coming into town. It's going to be great to get back together with some BFL guys. Talk to them guys, about their season. We'll just a great vibe, man. It's just a great event. Tidal Potomac events for BFL. I mean, Major League Fishing has kind of set the standard on the Tidal Potomac. They do it better than anybody. That's just a lot of people come this week. 3 events inside of 8 to 10 days. That's a lot. I just hope all the largemouth bass in the Tidal Potomac and some snakeheads. Snakeheads are still out. They're pretty active. They're gonna be annoying some people. Okay, up in these Virginia creeks and Maryland creeks over the next week or so. That's for sure. I mean, they're going to be out. They're going to be out and about roaming too, especially after the storm that's kind of stirred everything up. Okay, they're going to be out, but it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how the Tidal Potomac shows out. And then after the event, we'll do a little bit more breakdown videos on where the hot spots have been this year, where the big bags have been caught this year, and where the people are that I know and myself that have been catching. Just don't want to do that before. I want to get fair to everyone to be releasing that. I will be releasing the Upper Potomac breakdown of all the catches since COVID. Okay? All of my catches on the Upper Potomac smallmouth scene since COVID. That's crazy sick. So I'm going to reveal where all the citation smallmouths are. I'm going to reveal where all the 19s and the 18s and the 17-inch smallmouth are. Okay? We're going to do that first, and then we'll break down, after the Toyota Series and the College Series, we'll break down what it was like this year on the Tidal Potomac and what we saw compared to years past. All right, guys, as always, have a great day. If you're coming into town for BFL, Toyota Series, or if you're traveling from all over the country, all these colleges, be safe in your travels, and I'll see you on the river coming up this week.